Hey everyone, welcome back to this round 6 analysis of my chess tournament in Germany. But before we start today, we got a little menu item of German cuisine. I'm excited as well, I'm excited. This, you can guess what it is in the comments. This is Currywurst, which is a German staple since 1949. Since World War II. And basically, I think it's pork sausage. Apparently, it's very, very appetizing. So, cheers everyone. My Muslims and my Jews actually look away, so. Yep. Very nice. Very nice. So at this point in the tournament, you guys, I have 3 out of 5. So, I need a bounce back win. And I'm playing against a 2000 rated German player who was born in 1952. He's like 70, right? So I go into this game pretty confident because my opponent's peak was over 260 points above 2000, their current rating. In the preparation phase of this game, I was trying to see what my opponent played because he has such a long career that looking at his database is only profitable to know what he's going to play in the opening. And thanks to ChessBase, who sent me their software, ChessBase 17, and the mega database of 2023, and that made me super prepared for this match. Thank you so much to ChessBase for sponsoring this video. With ChessBase, you have unlimited amounts of tools that can make you prepare against your opponent, learn from your games after, and the mega database, which I received as well, is so good for preparing against your opponents. Find out what they played in the past, and then just pointing out the details in their play that they don't play often. After the game, my opponent told me word for word, bar for bar, he goes, "This move I don't know," and I was clueless from move 7 in the opening. He said this to me. All thanks to ChessBase. So shout out to ChessBase. Go purchase their software. It's really good for the serious chess player who plays in OTB tournaments and wants to continuously prepare to be better against their opponents. Let's get into the game. E4 is what I played. I have the white pieces, my opponent has the black pieces. Now I knew because of ChessBase that when I go E4, my opponent goes C5 most of the time. So I had this prepared, and against knight F3, my opponent in this last decade has gone with knight F6. I say in this last decade because my opponent used to go queen C7. So I go E5, attacking the knight and forcing it to go to D5. If you don't go to D5, I mean, it's not what I studied, but I would have been clueless against this, but I can assume that D3 or queen here are very good moves to play against this knight and just gain a tempo on it. So knight D5 is theory, and I go with knight C3. Knight C3 is the most playable. There's also C4, which is a bit less common, but knight C3 and E6, and so far we're perfectly bar for bar on exactly what I know what to play and what he knows what to play. But now comes the kicker. Here, usually, the main move is knight takes D5. But because of ChessBase, I looked into the database, and knight E4 gives actually really good chances for the white pieces here. Because the idea is to take up space and to take up a lot of this D6 square, so that if black plays D6, which is one of the main moves, I can go takes, bishop B5 check. You can't defend with none of these two moves because I have knight takes D6 and I win a full piece. So then knight C6 is pretty forced, and white will enjoy ruining black's pawn structure in exchange for the bishop pair and have a pretty favorable endgame. So that's kind of the idea of the knight on E4, to pressure that D6 square and always keep an eye on that bishop if D6 is played. But my opponent plays the main move, the main move, F5, attacking my knight. My opponent told me after the game they were clueless beyond F5 and even at F5. I go knight C3. Which is weird because you shouldn't move the same piece twice in the opening. This is what everybody tells you, from GMs to your average chess instructor. And it's true, usually you shouldn't, except when it's theory and you're well prepared, right? So use this with caution. I'm attacking this knight once again, but it's different this time, because here we're accentuating the weakness of F5 that I created. And so black doesn't want to get into this, and they trade off the knight, to which D takes C3 is the most popular move and is the played move. I take back with the D pawn, and now I essentially have firm control over D6. That is the idea of the opening. That's what I want to master here. And my opponent goes with D5. A mistake, a positional mistake, which is that much more harder to prove and move against. D5 is not a good move. It got me out of my prep. But it wasn't a good move either. My opponent is clueless as well. What would you play here with white? Take a second or two by intuition, you don't have to calculate everything. Do you go on with development, like bishop e3, or bishop g5, or bishop e2, or do you take en passant, which is forced, essentially, I don't know, break up the pawn structure here? The correct answer is actually what I played. Black is left with a pretty bad pawn structure, but it looks like after queen takes d6, if bishop takes d6, we know this pattern from our preparation because bishop b5 here, and now you can't defend with knight or bishop on d7 because I take on d6. So you have to play knight c6, and we know that this is good for white. So I wasn't scared about this, but queen takes d6 I am scared about. And so what do I do here? The best move is to go queen e2, completely banned in the chess teacher realm. The bishop can't develop, right? It just sinks your bishop to the bottom of the sea. The idea of queen e2 though is to play bishop d2 quickly and then castles, and then you would have a rook on the queen. So quick development and go on the weakness, which is super counterintuitive to come up with. And instead here I go with bishop g5. The idea is also quick development, let's say takes, and I'm threatening rook d8, and I really like this. It's piece activity. I have a lot of development compared to no development in my opponent, and that was pretty much the idea. Here though, I love h6 for black. It took a lot from me to come up with this for black, and the idea is that here I would have taken bishop takes, and I would have castled long. So you can take my bishop, but I can take your bishop. And I like this for white. After takes, I calculated g4 and knight e5, and I was on board. My opponent plays knight c6. So many moves in this opening are just like mind-bending because I don't know how to reply. Knight c6 here is just so out of the scope that I've been analyzing with exchanging and castling, and so I go for my plan anyways. I take, and I castle, and that's made possible because of that early bishop move. And the castle comes on tempo. I really love my dynamic play to develop while attacking my opponent's pieces. That's the essence of getting ahead in this endgame. The bishop has to move and goes to e7. Again, I'm just so puzzled by this move because I'm anticipating bishop c7 to take up all these diagonals and take up d8. But bishop e7 just doesn't sit well with me because it just gives bishop f4, which is not even good. I should have used bishop e7, the bishop moving a second time in the game, to develop my own piece, and then my knight is actually not an alien on g5 because it helps attack e6. Let's say h6, we get our same pattern. We take here with check first, screw up the pawn structure, and then play knight f3 to go back to e5, and then jam this light squared bishop on c8. That's inside its own pawn structure, eating it alive, right? But I didn't see this. I go bishop f4 with the target to point at e5 and really put a piece here for, again, the same idea. I want to make this light square bishop extremely bad. I guess it gives h6 with g5, but I had that in mind with bishop e5. Anyways, my opponent castles. What? You're leaving all your problems with your bishop. It now can't develop once you castle here. The bishop is terrible now. What does white play? Well, I'm just trying to get the e5 square. Again, you could go for something that attacks e6, like the previous knight g5 plans. But I don't love this as much, and nor does the engine, which is a key part of this argument. It could go into a rook endgame, which is drawn, and that's especially what I tried not to do. So I go with bishop b5. You're attacking this weakness to mess up the pawn structure and then get a nice piece on the board. So piece activity and nice piece placement against attacking and trying to win a pawn. My opponent goes with knight b8. At this point, I'm like, this is a joke, right? Knight b8, undeveloping a piece. And now we get to this picturesque position in which white has 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces developed, and black has 1. And there's one piece that is screaming to get let into the party, and that is my h-rook. Rook he1, and now all my pieces are full blast, basically all on the best squares possible on this board. I have to win this. If I lose this game as white, it's a disgrace, just positionally. If my opponent plays well, he plays well, but this, you can't come back from this. Even if I'm playing a higher seed, even if I'm playing a GM, I hold myself to a standard that I must do great out of this position, out of this opening. Rook he1 is played. And so now, look at these pieces. The knight can't develop to d7, c6, or a6. c6 and a6, giving doubled pawns once my bishop takes. On d7, anything that goes on d7 gives a piece. The bishop has no development. Something like b6, I just don't love that much. I mean, it's just slow to develop this bishop. It's really slow. And so my opponent goes with a6, trying to bring up the pressure and force my bishop to move more. And now I go bishop c4, and that was the idea the whole time. I'm attacking the e6 pawn. After I got rid of this knight on c6 that was defending e5, I have won the e5 square, and now we go in for the e6 square. So we win squares little bit by little bit. Knight c6 is played, and now I don't love to take here. I don't want to take here at all. I don't want to take the free candy right away, because after bishop f6, I calculated that I don't love this. I evaluated pretty much that I don't love this. So here I delay my taking of the pawn. Risky, but if you calculate well, you calculate well. The best move here is knight g5. Knight g5 attacks this a third time and I guess wins it outright. But I go with bishop d6, forcing a bishop trade, because I didn't like this bishop coming to f6 in the other variation, and now we're attacking this pawn threefold. I like this. It's hard to defend this pawn, and if you try with knight d8, let's say, now I go knight g5, and the pawn is not good. I even calculated such a steamy line here. If knight f7, and the idea for black is if takes, and you try to minimize the damage on e6, here I have rook takes that I calculated. If you take the knight, I have rook e8 check. And if king here, it's mate, right? So I had that. I didn't have this, however. Bishop takes, rook takes, and then you take here. Oh, and if bishop takes here, bishop takes. And now we're threatening this knight threefold. And let's say h6, I can take, and rook e5 to finish it off. And I'm winning a pawn above the pawn that I won on e6. 2 pawns up is nice advantage, especially in the rook endgame, easy to convert. My opponent goes rook d8 first, so I don't have this rook anymore. So I trade off. Even though taking here was better, I didn't love this endgame. Once again, I'm very picky of how to choose the endgame of a pawn up. Maybe these knights are the winning factor here for white, but I didn't like that I couldn't invade nor on e7 nor on e5, really important squares, right? So I take here, and now I go knight g5. I really am pressing for this pawn, and I found something that was really nice with the knight g5 line, so that's what made me choose it, right? On b5, it looks like the bishop is pressured to take here on e6, and it would go along the lines of takes, which is not the preferable piece you want to take with. You want to take with the knight, but okay. Bishop takes, black can take, and the knight takes, and I like kind of that black has the option to keep the bishop or keep the knight, right? Takes, and they could not take here and go knight c6. I don't love this. Oh, they can't actually. Okay, so in this variation, they would have to take, because otherwise c5 falls. But on b5, I get to be the conductor of the train once more before I take the pawn and give up the initiative for the first time in this game of chess. And that is with the special move bishop d5, which is the best move in this position, and just goes on the trick that black is in the mating net. If you take my bishop, it's checkmate. Why is this such a good move? Is that I'm attacking the rook first, so that when the rook moves, now I can take with the knight. That's the whole idea. So knight takes, bishop takes, bishop takes. Otherwise it's a fork, like you have to take my bishop, and then I take with the rook. And now we're in an endgame, rook endgame with a pawn up. Might I say to you, this is the first game that is not crazy. Out of my 6 rounds, all 5 previous games, by my standards, they might not be by your standards, but give them a look, even like if you just skip the whole video and go in the middle. By my standards, all 5 of my first games were quote-unquote crazy. Something chaotic happens in the middle game, some king is exposed, some attack on an enemy king, something happens. This game is extremely positional and comes into an endgame that is extremely thematical. Rook e6. And I like this endgame because I take the bishop here and I'm threatening rook e5 to win another pawn. So it's a tempo move taking that pawn. And so c4 is played. It's forced, right? I forced it out of my opponent. And now I go for a4, trying to detach these pawns and essentially trying to make a play on my pawn up. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to queen your extra pawn and make a decisive advantage out of the small advantage you have now. King f7, and now I go for rook b6. And this is a mistake I don't understand, actually. I think, well, okay, rook c6 is way better, says the engine, but it's hard for me to know why. Okay, on takes, rook takes c4, and it's obvious that these pawns are way better than rook b6. But what if black does nothing? Let's say g5. Here, what do I do? How is my advantage so concrete? And the idea of rook c6 is to go a5 and nail shut this weakness on a6. And what if the king moves over, you say? At the very least, I have rook b6, nailing your rook here, and the king can never come to interfere or corrupt my rook on b6. If your king goes here and you try to trade rooks, the second you do that, I take on a6. And now it's basically a king endgame with extra steps. It's phenomenal, right? So I go rook b6. And what's less good about this move is if you take, I go rook b4, and I lose a tempo. Because on rook c6, I would have taken a pawn immediately. Rook c7 to defend the pawn, and I take on a4. I take on a4, attacking this a6 pawn. Rook c6, and now it's kind of like the two Spider-Mans pointing at each other, that meme, because I'm attacking your pawns, you're defending my pawn, your pawn. So I go king d2. And my idea is really simple. I just want to win c4 and win the game. So f4 is played. This move really didn't sit right for me. f4 is an overextension of a pawn. It just doesn't sit right. And I was thinking about f4, and I have like 15 minutes on the clock right now. And I'm thinking, how can I really disrupt or make this weakness evident, right? And the king e2, king f3 was not that amazing. I mean, black just defends the pawn, and for me to concretize this is kind of like murky. Unsure, so I go with another idea. And sure enough, I come up with a really nice idea, b3. And the idea is to x-rate these pawns. Also goes on the fact that this king is not well placed on f7. If you take my pawn and accept the trade here, I don't take the pawn first, I take this pawn instead with checking the king. The king has to move, and now I have two pawns up and my pawns are not doubled. One thing in this endgame is that I'm only a pawn up, and rook endgames can be drawn with only a pawn up. Also, that my pawn up is a doubled pawn. So if I undouble that pawn, I am greaterly winning. New word by Zachary Sane right there. b3, and then my opponent just ignores it and defends their f4 pawn. And this is a game time decision. What do you do here as the white pieces? Do you push b4? Do you do nothing and play rook a5 to attack g5? Or do you take this pawn on c4? Might I say that rook takes, I think, is a draw or losing. This pawn is such a venomous pawn here. It's actually completely drawn or losing here. If I play badly, like if I try to get this pawn via this route, I lose all three of my pawns because of this outside pass pawn here. And when it comes to the pawn endgame right here, this is losing because the king just fetches my pawns first. So I can't take with the rook. It's out of the negotiation. So you got your final answer here. Take a couple seconds, pause the video. I took, actually, giving myself triple isolated pawns, but I'm 2 pawns up. But 2 of those pawns are literally these pawns. Black gains an outside pass pawn from this, which is extremely interesting for me. After rook check, king e2, and then h6 is to go rook here. So the rook is not on c6 anymore. I can advance my rook, maybe do rook d5 things, which is looking nice, to undouble my pawns, and then that pawn endgame would be winning. Or on rook c6, which wasn't played. On rook c6, my idea was to go c5, and a plan that I later do. But king e6 was played. And now I go h4, pressuring g5. Again, my rook has so many options being on a5 compared to a4. You want your pieces to be active in the endgame. And so h4 attacks g5. And on takes, I'm forking your pawns. And essentially, I would be ready to give up a couple pawns here for your pawns here, and then turn the tables. Like my pawns are actually on the king's side trying to queen, which would be extra interesting. My opponent defends with king f6, and that was the idea of h4. And I'm really happy about this, because now the king is far enough so that I can do my plan. I trade first on g5 and then go c5. The rook is constrained to this pawn on a6 and wants to stop my pawn, so rook c6 is pretty much forced. And now I go king d3. And on king e5, I go king c4 to defend my pawn with my king. Why does any of this matter? Why don't I just do this now in this position? I didn't love the fact that on c5 rook here and king d3 to go to c4, there's king d5 to prevent that. And on c4 check, you can never take this pawn, king e5, and now white finds himself in quite a jam. I mean, this is just not that playable. So the entire idea of h4 on king f6 is to get the king far enough so that now in this variation I get c4 and you don't get to d5 first to prevent my king from going there. So now king c4 and I defend the pawn with my king. g4 and now my plan comes into action. Rook a1 to create the d5 square for my king. Get that other king out of here. So g3. By the way, my opponents here, I think we're on move 38. They have like 2 minutes on the clock, like really in time trouble. Here I play rook e1 check first before taking this pawn. And after king here, I see something that I like a lot. Though, I have to mention this. I'm completely winning if I take the pawn first. Use that gain of tempo to just go king d5. And on rook here, my pawn is just queening. Like this would have been such a simple win. I get into time pressure too, thinking about this position, and I go f3. Fixating these two pawns, and now you see white's idea. The rook slits through the e file, and ever so prevents this king from defending this pawn. So what do we have here? We have a king and pawn versus rook endgame. And now my king can just bring this pawn down the board and hopefully win a rook or queen. Rook c8, and this poses some problems. I got scared here, and I didn't calculate, which ultimately complicated this game, this endgame for me. I thought that if on king d5, because of this rook c8 move, there's rook d8 check now. And okay, I can go to c6, but then rook d2. And this pawn is not a pawn I want to lose, and I'm not even sure if this is winning anymore. And this is my calculation, so I'm giving you some candy by playing it out on the board. But for me, this was really murky. After it takes this, rook takes this. Okay, this is now completely winning for black, but I stopped calculating around here when I saw that the rook is led into d2 and that my rook would have to go here and maybe king here. I didn't like anything. I didn't like anything concerning this. So I go rook e2 first, defending my g2 pawn and doubling down on the cutting off of this king on f5. The problem now is that white has some convincing counterplay with a5, and this took 20 minutes off my clock after this 40 move gap. So I had 40 minutes after 40 moves, and now I have 20 minutes after 40 moves right now. And my suspicion is that on king b4, or king b5, say, a4, king takes, rook takes, and now it looks like I still go on with my plan, right? King b4, rook c8, c4, but white has like good resources somehow. Check, okay? If I go here, rook c8, always pinning the rook down to the pawn. King here, check. My king can't go too far because after check, you just have to come back to save the pawn. And then after check, okay, king a6, rook c8, and my king is forced back. And this can be a draw if I'm not careful. On something like king c3 coming back, then just rook c8, and my pawn can never push up. It's really annoying, like I can't progress as the white pieces. And finally, the idea is that white is still winning if they go rook e4. But I'm like, I have a phobia of this, or this, shall I say, resource, to go pin or get to g2. And so after a4, I finally come up with this, king b5. And I had seen that a4, c6, a3, king b6, a2, rook here, and then rook b8 check, king here, rook b1 would be winning for black. So I was really scared of that. But instead, I took out the fog of my calculation. I play c6 first, and after a3, really precisely, no king b6 first, rook e1. And on a2, now I go rook a1. Change of move order. And now the rook ba resource is nothing. And if rook b2, you lose because I have c7, you can't defend against c8 queen with check next move. So just a little switch, you see, like a little tune-up, and now I'm winning. I'm winning mentally, like in my brain. That's the best type of winning. You're winning on concrete calculations, not the engine checking out the engine that 5 moves win. When you're winning because you saw a line 5, 10 moves in advance, and that's winning. So rook b8 check is played here, and I play king c5. And I'm just pushing c7 next move. It's really hard to defend this. a2 threatening rook b1, and c7 is the move that just seals it, right? If rook b1, I go c8 queen, check, check. Super important I have check, because otherwise a1. And the king gets mated. Like, I don't even care about this resource at all. I'm not trying to win the pawn, although I can. But let's say this, check, king here, checkmate. On c7, rook h8 was played, and now I just convert by bringing my king up to help the pawn. And this counterplay is absolutely useless on a2. And after king b7, my opponent resigned. It's a super important win. It's the second win I have that's punching above my current rating, which was super emotional for me, and put a big smile on my face. I am now at 4 out of 6 in this tournament, which is so far pretty well shooting. 4 out of 6, I believe, is 66.66%, which is a good win percentile. Have a nice day.